and Kristen O'Malley will not be able to join us this morning. So they are not here, but we'll do roll call. Dorothy Savarese.
Here.
Wendy Northcross.
Here.
Here. Karen Gardner.
Here.
Sean Gonzalez. Sean's not here yet. He could be joining presently, but that's a quorum, so we can begin. We're going to begin with the approval of the meeting minutes from July 21st. Second. Moved and seconded. We will do a roll call. Dorothy Savarese. Cross.
Yes. Yeah.
Sean Gonzalez. Okay, the minutes are approved. There are no outstanding questions for the CLA consultants. That's agenda item number 3. So we can move right into the bulk of the discussion today, which is item 4, discussion of large project priorities for water quality. We've broken them down into sort of wastewater, drinking water, fresh water, but we have members of the public and members that we've invited from important water quality organizations and institutions. So I think the best thing, the discussion we had last week on housing, I think went pretty well. I think we got some good information out. So I think the best way for us to proceed is really to open up the floor. So just to let everyone that's here know, members of the public know where we are in the process to date. This committee has prioritized housing and water quality as the 2 biggest regional challenges. And so the county has, I believe, approximately 30 million ARPA funds to spend on different projects. So what we're trying to do now is to assemble a list of recommendations in both of those issue areas for the commissioners that they should consider funding projects. The county has a long-standing history on water quality issues. So I think this is going to be a good and fruitful discussion. So we'll open it up to public comment or comment from anyone around the table here today. I just ask that you identify yourself and the organization that you represent for the purpose of meeting minutes. And I think we can begin. Do we have a volunteer or someone who wants to? Gordon.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Gordon Starr. I'm a town councilor in the town of Barnstable. My big issue is I represent the Barnstable Village Water District, and it's not part of the town. It's not part of the town.
Right.
And I know Bourne has water fire districts. Barnstable has 4 water districts, 5 fire districts. Right. So I just want to so we have a small village, small water system with 2,000 customers, and we have to put in a $20 million filtration plant for PFOs and PFAs. So any help we could get doing that would be wonderful. Find a way to get us into the portal, put that portal where it is, you know?
Yeah.
So that's basically why I'm here, just to listen.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. So we start off with drinking water and PFAS issue is an issue Cape-wide. So thanks for sort of identifying that for us. Anyone else want to volunteer? George.
Sure. My name is George Hoyfelder. I work for Barnstable County Department of Health and Environment, which I was the director for years. I've been working in wastewater and particularly for homes for the last 20 years. Started the Alternative Septic System Test Center. And I know I don't have to tell anybody around the table that fresh water, drinking water, water resources are important to our economy and our livelihood and really our quality of life. And as we go forward, spending millions and millions, hundreds of millions, or I've even heard the Carl Sagan billions of dollars for water, to point out and request that as you go forward, thinking about what's presented to you, and I don't have any particular one now, that you consider that 7 out of 10 people on Cape Cod will not be served by municipal sewer. This afternoon or this morning, I delivered a treatment unit to somebody's house. That treatment unit went in under their own expense. They'll never be hooked up to sewer, but for the life of that system, they'll be responsible for its treatment, its performance, its continuance, the power that runs it, all of the expenses that they will bear on their own. Plus, they will pay for a municipal sewer that will never come to their house. So I would ask you to consider projects that fold in alternative septic systems as well as systems in people's backyards into some municipal infrastructure to complete the package for comprehensive wastewater management. There are presently about 3,000 of these treatment units in people's backyards. The one I delivered today, fortunately, was somebody who could afford it. They said, no, spare no expense, put it in, I'll take care of it. But a lot of people aren't in that circumstance. And our data over the past 20 years now points out that if we don't fold some sort of assistance to those folks who have them in their backyards, we're gonna fall short of a lot of our goals. So as you see projects come out about, trying to fold in some municipal oversight support, because, if you have a septic system in your backyard right now, you're thinking, God, I hope it doesn't break, that it isn't deemed inadequate through future regulations, that I don't have to put in some, and I don't have to take care of it forever on my own, and if it breaks, I'm at the mercy of a service provider. No, I believe that we should be treating it just like what it is. It's needed infrastructure to protect water quality in Cape Cod. So as you see these projects come before you, I wish you would consider that, because it's not cheap. It's not inexpensive. And the ones that are out there, our experience tells us that if we're not watching them, if we're not providing some support, they're not going to be working, because people will just turn them off because they're going to hope that they're not discovered. We can't go on those hopes, because the people on sewer, on municipal sewer, they're not going to worry about that, because there's going to be a blue plate special parked in front of their house if something happens to that line in front of their house. By blue plate, I mean a municipal truck. So please consider that as you move forward in your deliberations, and as you consider projects that are being brought before you by some of the departments. And also, of course, I would plug that you consider projects that enhance the assets the county has already invested in. We have the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center. It's a premier center that has done research and now is working on for ponds, phosphorus research on septic systems and alternative units and ways to reduce phosphorus. So consider that asset and bolstering that asset, because you may hear of some of the top performing systems for nitrogen removal at people's houses. Consider that the prototypes for those were developed at our center. Because the county made that investment, it had the format, the forum, the platform for some innovative research, and not only technology for monitoring these systems remotely, which saves people money, but the technologies themselves. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, George. Are there any questions from the committee? Dan?
George, thanks. The system that you were just alluding to that was being installed, is that regulatory? They have to put that system in?
No,
So they're voluntarily doing
they
it?
were right on a pond that will never be sewered. And they said, we need to do something. And as I said, if you've got the means, you're gonna do that.
And is it strictly denitrification, or is it
No,
also phosphorus?
It's also a phosphorus removal system. It's both.
And general cost?
General cost of that system is about $15,000 for material system. That system, by the way, because of our participation in the county's investment, we got that system donated for that purpose to be put in. Now the person will have to take care of it in perpetuity. They'll have to run it. But that system, the actual asset was placed in there under a donation, which we do when we see good technology out there. Our center will go out and try to get one from the vendor, say, hey, we'll put it in, we'll do some monitoring. We got a grant to do some of the monitoring on it also.
And so that's an active system,
Yes,
it requires energy
yes, it
and
does.
annual maintenance, any idea?
I'm going to say that annual maintenance will be somewhere around $400 to $500.
Including the energy or not?
The energy not included.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for George, after his comments? I just have one general question, George. The
Yes.
test facility,
Yes,
is there a next step that the county could take if they want to develop that? What would that be?
absolutely. The next steps would be to enhance it. Right now, we're working with remote sensing, for instance, remote sensing of systems. And also folded into the test center, as Brian Baumgartner would tell you, is the assistance to the town in monitoring the performance of all the systems in their town and presenting it back to them. So it's a feedback loop to pick out the best available technologies. They need to be enhanced to the point where they can provide absolutely for the towns, the best quality information. So there's safety upgrades, electrical upgrades, and some staffing issues.
Great. Thank you. So next up, actually, I see Brian on the line.
Can I make a further comment?
Sure, go ahead. Steve.
Zenas Crocker is the executive director of Barnstable Clean Water Coalition. So I just want to piggyback. I didn't know George was coming, but we're doing a project that everybody should be aware of at Schuylkill Pond, working with the US EPA and the US Geological Survey. We now have 12 of one kind of system in the ground, the nitro system by Cleanton. We're about to put the advanced layer cake system in on August 22nd that George and team have developed. We have 37 groundwater monitoring wells in the ground. We're monitoring all these systems, and by we, I mean the team at MassTech, as well as the US EPA, monitoring all the wells on a consistent basis, both monthly and quarterly, and we have been doing this for some time. Performance continues to be outstanding. We're running north of 90% reduction now on average for nitrogen. We are not removing phosphorus. One of the most interesting things that I think the county needs to examine further is phosphorus and exactly how it transits and how it moves through the grounds in and around Cape Cod. Remarkably, even though in this region with the 37 wells, and just in a few acres, by the way, we have this kind of concentration of well data, and this was installed by the US EPA and USGS, we are not finding phosphorus, even though we see 30 milligrams of phosphorus coming out of some of the septic systems. So the phosphorus seems to be bound up exceptionally quickly in the iron-loaded soils of Cape Cod. Now, this is critical as we look to understand exactly how we're going to treat our 1,000 ponds and lakes on Cape Cod. We need more work. The county should support this work. It doesn't matter whether it's our organization or some other organization to, I think, put in a cluster of systems close to a pond, some pond, where we're working. We had hoped the water would be flowing into the pond. Interestingly, the models that indicated that that would be the case were not correct, even though the USGS models. Groundwater is exceptionally complicated, and water is actually flowing out of the pond in this location. We're still capturing terrific data, very important data, and we're able to identify what's in the water. We're looking at contaminants of emerging concern along with phosphorus, and I think one of the key things that George didn't talk about, although he's doing very important work, is looking at viruses and looking at contaminants of emerging concern in our groundwater on Cape Cod. We are not mandated federally to look at a lot of contaminants, and I think we simply don't understand what the combination of medicines and household products going into our groundwater that we're drinking, we just don't know what that means. PFAS obviously has come to the fore lately, but I expect there'll be other things as well that we collectively need to understand and look at a lot more carefully. So what I would say is, first and foremost, support Brian and MassTech and the work that's being done there. They recently got a grant to look further at CECs. What's really interesting about the wood chip based systems is early days of some studies that George has done with with Stony Brook in New York indicate that we may see reductions, substantial reductions, maybe 90% plus reductions in some of these contaminants of emerging concern. To me, what's particularly interesting there is a typical circulating sludge system, which most of our municipal systems are, only reduce CECs by 30 to 35%, 40% maybe. So we're not getting those kind of reductions, even as we look for our drinking water out of well fields that are surrounded by a lot of the effluent that goes back into the ground and gets recharged. So I think there's more work to do. Funding for the RME, I think everybody may know on Friday, SNAP grant came through for Mastech, 1.1 or $1.2 million. Neighborhood Conservancy has added on to that. It's going to take more than that to get a reliable management entity structure that can oversee alternative septics as they get rolled out, whatever kind they are. And there are several encouraging ones coming along in addition to the ones that we're working on. We have to have that infrastructure. People have to know that they have to pump their septic tanks, particularly for these new systems. And we simply have to have the data collectively to do that. Funding, I think, is the next critical thing that this entity that you all need to work on and figure out how we can use SRF funding to provide funding for individual septic systems on some kind of a collective basis, so that funding can be used to accelerate these systems as they move through the approval process and as we get more data on them. And finally, as I said, more testing, especially around CECs, phosphorus, and understanding more about those conditions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Z, and I think already the comments that have been made, we can see that the issues of wastewater, freshwater ponds, drinking water are converging, right, around public and private infrastructure. So I think that's important to note. I see Brian is on the line, and I would just open the floor to you, Brian, at this point, because we've discussed sort of your programs already.
Andrew has his hand up.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. Yes, I wanted to join you in person today. However, unfortunately, I've picked up COVID, which, you can kind of take my personal situation as a reminder of why ARPA came about in the first place, which was this terrible pandemic that we've all been forced to live through, and the importance of making investments in public health programs. So, as you're looking to put together your set of recommendations, despite the fact that we're here to talk about water quality today, I would advocate for serious consideration for public health programs as well, because we need to bolster what we have in a lot of ways to help prevent these types of future pandemics from spiraling out of control, as this one has in a lot of ways. But regardless, onto the subject of water quality. Yes, my name is Brian Baumgartel. I am the director of the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center. Historically, we have called it the Test Center, but in more recent times, we've moved on toward calling it a technology center because I think that better encompasses the more broad range of activities that we are engaged in. Since I've taken over as director of the Test Center from George about 3 or 4 years ago at this point, I've been particularly interested in engaging in a very holistic approach to engaging alternative septic systems in the region in a much more concerted way. So to that end, I'm very much interested in the full life cycle of the system. So how do we finance these systems? How do we take some of the burden off of the folks who live on the Cape who are facing a whole myriad of problems and can barely afford to live here? As a matter of fact, I couldn't personally purchase my own house if I were on the market right now for a house. And the thought of adding an additional tax bill to pay for wastewater on top of that makes me, wonder if I could even really afford to be here at all, which I think is a critical point to take consideration. Wastewater, I think, is one of the core problems that trickles down into most of the other problems that we have. And, one of the things that I think on-site wastewater and these advanced technologies bring to the table is the potential to save some funding while still meeting our environmental goals, so that we have funding left over to deal with some of these other problems. So I know over the years, you've probably seen, some folks have probably seen me present about IA systems and George present about IA systems. And for the most part, we've talked about the older technologies that don't look so great. And a lot of towns, I think, have written them off as an option because they just seem to be too expensive and they didn't work well enough to be an option. And we've been working diligently to try to find ways to reverse that because we do think that they can provide a much needed resource for our area in terms of the infrastructure that's needed. So the newer technologies that have come onto the scene that show a lot of promise and are able to treat wastewater for nitrogen, particularly because that's what we've all been so focused on for so long, get down into the realm of what we see with larger treatment plants. Maybe not the highest technology treatment plants, but certainly, in the realm of what is needed to help clean up our bays and estuaries. And we're also finding that in a lot of ways, these systems can be more affordable than, in some cases, depending on density and other factors, centralized infrastructure. And that was identified as part of the 208 process that you headed up, Paul, a few years back to identify ways to address the problem holistically, involving a myriad of solutions and utilizing adaptive management strategies to help clean up our bays and estuaries. So the work that we do is part of that adaptive management strategy, which is the exploration part. Oftentimes we will seek to exploit, that is one part of adaptive management. You seek for the currently best technology and exploit it to its fullest. In that case, for the most part, it's been sewering technology. But these other programs, like at the test center or work that's being done on permeable reactive barriers and shellfish, that's the exploration part of adaptive management that is just as important, if not more important, than merely exploiting the best current technology. Because we need to know what's the best way to do it, how do we meet our water quality goals, and do it in a way that's economical and equitable for everyone. So I'll end my comments there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Any questions from the committee? Okay, Andrew has been waiting patiently. You're up next.
Great, thanks for the chance to talk to you. And I find myself in a situation very similar to Brian, which is why I'm home. What I guess I would encourage you to do is think about strategically the perspective on this money. It's, a one-time opportunity to do something significant and transformative. And while we have lots of individual projects that we could easily consume all this money and then some more, I'm not sure that's the best use of the money. I think the best use of this money is to do something that is otherwise beyond the means of county government, given its cash flow resources that we know we need to deal with. In particular, and I know you've been supportive of this, I think the Lakes Initiative is an important initiative. We've known going back to the early days of 208 that we had a freshwater issue. The technology, the regulatory environment, the awareness is far less well developed on how to deal with the ponds, and yet we have as big or a bigger problem pond wide than we did perhaps when we finally got the consensus and political will to do the 208 study on the estuarine environment. They're similarly scaled in size, but if you look at the value of that investment in terms of, in the 208 program I meant, in terms of what it spawned, the payback, the return on that investment was orders of magnitude beyond what we put into it. And I think that thinking about this ARPA money that way, I think has the greatest value in moving that, in helping to move an issue forward in a significant way. So, on the lakes, sure, we could sample and pilot and do different things on a particular system or series of systems and understand a little bit more about a system, how it functions in one particular lake watershed. But I'm not sure that moves the ball as far forward for us as we need to. We need to have a transformative understanding of what our technological options are, where they fit in the timeline, where and how certain lakes can be categorized so that we can begin management interventions in light of the fact that we don't know everything. But I think we've learned on the estuarine side that you don't need to know everything before you can do something. And I think, using this money that way to create a framework that allows the region to move forward from a variety of perspectives, from a public communication and education perspective, make sure people understand the issues at hand, the value of the freshwater environment, what it means to our long-term economic well-being. We're not there yet. That has to be part of this. Understanding the technological options that are available to people. And as we did with the 208 program, so separate myth and hope from reality, and bound for people what's real and what isn't, because we know that people will grasp onto things that are not real in some respects because they want to delay investment and expenditure of money. And we know that dynamic, and we need to figure out how to get ahead of it. We need to create, and you've heard this from some of the previous speakers, the management structure that worked for ponds. The watershed approach worked for estuaries. Is that the right corollary? You've heard a lot of conversations about, RMEs clearly going to be part of it. How does that all fit in? What types of advice do we give towns in terms of short-term and long-term, and when they make investments in alternative systems in freshwater environments that might be targeted more towards addressing the needs of the marine environment? What kind of future are we locking in for those freshwater systems, because we're not seeing by design attenuation of phosphorus? So I think there's a lot here that you can use this money to transform the conversation around freshwater management and launch us towards something else. Sure, it's attractive to invest in a PFAS treatment system or a CEC treatment system, but those are one-offs, and you'll spend all this money very quickly on a series of one-offs, and we still have these large systemic, hugely important issues that we need to look at. So that's one, push the lakes piece forward. On the PFAS and the CECs, we all know that, CECs are kind of like whack-a-mole. Today it's PFAS, and 5 years from now, it's going to be, I don't know what it is. It's going to be chemotherapies and anti-anxiety meds in combination with one another. 10 years ago it was perchlorate. You don't hear people talking about perchlorate very much. So, perhaps one of the things to think about on the drinking water side is step back from the crisis du jour and say, how do we manage and protect our drinking water supplies? We largely rely on land use zoning and wellhead protection zones. Given the threats that we have, is that enough? What should Cape Cod be looking at? How to manage and protect its water resources and protect the public health of people who rely on those water resources going forward? Do we need to start thinking about wellhead treatment? If we start thinking about wellhead treatment, what's that do to discussion about potential municipal wastewater discharge sites? How do those two things play off against one another? These are really big, thoughtful issues that nobody else has the time to wrap their head around. No one town has the resources to do it. It's what county government ought to be doing. County government may or may not have the resources, but you control the resources that would make something like that happen. So where possible, I would encourage you to step back from temptation to invest in a particular thing and invest this in a thought process that leads to a management pathway that allows us to have a long-term future that we can then build on. We built the Water Protection Trust on the 208 program. 208 program didn't solve how to fund it, but it laid out a framework in which you could have that discussion. We need to do the same thing on drinking water. We need to do the same thing on lakes. So I would encourage you to use this money that way.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So the issue of public-private infrastructure and water quality protection in general is emerging. I think we've already heard today about the need for management structures, and the county has really led on the issue of water quality for decades now. Financial assets in the Water Protection Trust Fund and the Septic Loan Program. It has the county lab, it has the test facility, it has the dredge. All of these are sort of water quality programs that the county runs and supports. And they're things that the towns would struggle to do on their own. So it does fill that sort of niche. So I think this has been a good discussion. But before I let Andrew off the hook, though, there are two things that are probably worth mentioning as part of this overall water quality discussion. The first one is the designation by the Department of Environmental Protection of nitrogen sensitive areas and what the consequences are going to be for the Cape on that. Andrew, could you fill in some of the blanks?
Sure. So DEP has come out with a regulatory framework that they're shopping around to each one of the 15 towns right now to get, and other groups to get comment on. There's two elements to it. The first is the stick. The stick says that basically within 5 years, in areas that have TMDL, so about 30 of the 53 watershed or embayments that are already demonstrated through that TMDL, total maximum daily load, as being over their nitrogen limit. And then in addition to those 30, anywhere else where they have scientific evidence that would lead to the same conclusion. In other words, the MEP technical reports. So everything else, for all intents and purposes, they would require the replacement of all Title V existing systems with alternatives that either general use or in piloting that exceed a general use performance. And so, a big sweeping stick, it'd be very expensive and very difficult to actually do in practical terms, given the number of systems and whether you could actually get that many in and out of the ground. The carrot, and where it gets interesting, is that 5-year replacement goes away if the town involved gets a watershed permit. And some of you may recall in the 2016, I think, environmental bond bill, the legislature included something in it that authorized DEP to do watershed permits in 208 watersheds, in other words, just for the Cape. And what DEP is trying to do is get towns into these 20-year watershed permits. They provide the structure by which towns can get credit for alternatives other than central treatment and discharge that require a groundwater discharge permit. So if you're a town that's relying for your nitrogen strategy on 50% attenuation over here for a treatment plant, 25% through IAs over in this part of town, the remaining 25% from shellfish, this watershed permit gives you the ability to get credit for those non-structural alternatives, non-central treatment alternatives, so that you're giving credit towards moving towards the TMDL. DEP, under their proposal, would require a town to meet at least 75% of the goal to achieving the TMDL within the first 20 years of that watershed permit. So what they're trying to do is, through what is admittedly a somewhat punitive draconian approach, to rip out all the existing Title V systems, encourage towns to go to watershed permits, to create a political incentive for the residents in the town to go to their boards of selectmen and say, go get a permit and start building some infrastructure, because that's the way for me to get off the hook for replacing my backyard system. So as a political strategy, I think it's pretty smart. And it changes the dynamic that most boards of selectmen get, which is a lot of people going and saying, we don't want to sewer everything, or we don't want to sewer this portion of town because it's expensive. But when they're faced with a 25, 30, maybe even more $1,000 bill that's theirs and theirs alone to pay, perspective changes. So that's the proposal at the moment. They're gathering comment and they plan on issuing draft regs for a formal public comment process in October. Gathering comment, closing the comment period in December, and then having a promulgation occur in late January, early February of 23, which, by the way, is in the next administration. So they've teed this whole thing up for the next governor to have to be the one to implement that. And obviously that's fraught with a lot of uncertainty. So hard to know exactly how that timeline is going to go. It was done as part of a court stay so that an incoming administration is not completely at its own discretion, but whether it proceeds with this stuff or not. But obviously you can't speak for them because we don't even know who they are yet.
Right. Good. Thank you for the background. The summarization is there could be significant cost to individual homeowners on Title V systems if within 5 years there isn't a watershed permit. And
Yeah.
where
That's a short version.
and one watershed permit on the Cape?
No, each individual watershed. So in our case, Mashpee's case, we had, Mashpee for Papaneset Bay would apply for a watershed permit with Barnstable and Sandwich. Coit Bay, Mashpee, Sandwich, and Falmouth, in theory.
Have any approved watershed permits on the Cape?
One.
Okay.
One in Pleasant Bay.
All right.
Is this just for Cape Cod?
Yes. So it was rolled out just for Cape Cod. There are other interests in southeastern Massachusetts, in particular the Buzzards Bay Coalition, that are interested in having this have applicability to their coastal watersheds as well. It's unclear to me where DEP is going to come down on that, but they're getting a lot of interest from the advocacy world in doing this because it's a pretty useful tool. The watershed permit, it would require statutory amendment because the applicability of the watershed permit is limited to 208 watersheds and area-wide water quality management plans, which right now is Barnstable County only.
Great. Thank you again. And then the second issue, I think if you've read the papers lately, is the dismissal of CLFs actually against the town of Barnstable. Any potential impacts of that decision?
I mean, what basically, so the Supreme Court ruled in the Maui case last year or the year before now, that EPA had discretionary authority to require surface water NPS discharge for groundwater discharges that were, quote, the functional equivalent, undefined term, of a groundwater discharge. So in the case that was decided in Maui, there was groundwater discharge right on the edge of the shore. It broke through the ground pretty quickly, ended up, visibly available within the surface water feature, and that was determined to be a functional equivalent. The CLF dismissal in this instance only tells us what's not in the United States District Court of Boston opinion a functional equivalent. So basically what we know is 21-year time of travel from the discharge point to the surface water, federal court in Boston is going to say is not the functional equivalent. What we don't know is whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. So, we know what it's not, and we're going to walk towards some middle ground over time to determine where that is. I think the rubber will hit the road on Cape Cod if and when Converge seeks to increase the discharge to the beds at the northeast corner or northwest corner of Joint Base Cape Cod to increase the flow, because everyone pretty much sees that flow breaks through pretty quickly from the ground into the canal. The major issue there will be that with the anoxia that's been occurring in Cape Cod Bay, from the canal to, if you draw a line from the canal to Wellfleet Harbor, everything to the south of that has gone anoxic the last 3 years. The big thing about the surface water permit program for EPA is something called the anti-degradation provisions, which basically mean that even if you can meet the discharge standard and your discharge would degrade the quality of the existing water body that you're discharging to, you can't do it. There's no similar corollary in the groundwater program. So I think that EPA or others asserting jurisdiction of the surface water permit to an enhanced discharge at the base is likely to be very interesting, the really next interesting test case on Cape Cod about where the boundary is.
Great. All very good background, good context for the committee. Dan.
That's my question. Andrew, in your opening remarks, you said invest in a thought process. Could you be more specific? And how do we do that?
Well, I think that I think the Commission's Lakes Initiative is is in part what I'm talking about. It tracks very closely the structural approach that was done in the 208 study. And I think that as much as anything, that was a way to organize our thinking and understand our problem in a way that gave us a way out of the box. And I think we have the same issue with the lakes. So I think the study, as Christie has proposed it, addresses that need. The second one that no one's thrown out really on the table is, to look at long-term future of drinking water. And, I think some smart people could sit down and scope something out pretty readily that looks at, emerging contaminants and, and does a study that says, what's the nature of these things? What are we likely to see in the coming 15, 20 years? What are the treatment alternatives, whether they're individual septics or centralized treatment or wellhead treatment? And what makes the most sense going forward? Do we continue to react one at a time to the emergence of new contaminants? And all we know with certainty, Dan, is that there's going to be a new one, because in America, we put new chemicals in the environment, see how they behave, see if they make people sick or not. And then if they do, we clean them up. We don't think about what their human health is prior to releasing them in the environment. So always playing catch up, always, always, always. And so, we know there's going to be more coming. So take a look at what's coming down the pike, look at the list of 200 CECs the EPA is looking at, and really think through, what's the best response to this? If we're really interested in protecting our public and not having these fire drills every time somebody gets worried about a new one of these, should we be looking at wellhead treatment? And that's largely antithetical to a lot of my environmental friends. People think that, if we do wellhead treatment, then we're not going to protect the landscape anymore. It takes the pressure away. And there's ways to think about those things so that we don't do that and provide a more cost-effective way of solving drinking water. So I think, everybody wants to run to projects with this money, but I think, coming up with frameworks for how we're going to deal with some really big public policy issues around water quality, particularly lakes and particularly drinking water, is a better, higher use of this money.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dorothy.
And just to probe that even further, although Andrew, you were very clear, so thank you. As you think about those two frameworks, what you've identified on the lake side is that it seems like there are more emergent structures in place, and that part of the framework, you talked about a management structure, is aligning the efforts that are underway at the town level, those that are funded federally through Nature Conservancy, et cetera, and figuring out a methodology of identifying deployment of emerging technologies and sort of leading to a strategy similar to the 208 plan in terms of helping to resolve that. Whereas with drinking water, and if I understood you correctly, it seems like that's more nascent in nature, where some of the fundamental questions in terms of a means of addressing it are still unquestioned, as you're talking about, wellheads versus other modalities. So
Yep.
Those at different stages of kind of progress, and would you ascribe or recommend kind of a different approach in terms of each element there?
I think that, Dorothy, I think the analysis on the drinking water side is actually probably the easier of the two. Because I think that, there are a limited number of very reliable treatment technologies that are out there. A lot of these compounds, can be grabbed by granular activated carbon filters. The technology, it's expensive, but it's not complicated. And it's really more from the policy perspective of and the costing perspective, what's in the community's best interest and how do we think about that? Because once you get a hit of a contaminant of XYZ in a particular town, the opportunity to think about it's gone, because everybody's hair is on fire and nobody wants the stuff in their water, and the town and the water suppliers are in a position of either shut the well down or get a treatment on it as quickly as possible, and that's what people want. And so thinking about it in advance is the only way to come up with a rational discussion, because once you've experienced a contamination incident, you're done. You're doing one of two things. You're shutting it off, and then eventually you're treating it. And that's it. And you never get a chance to think about it. So that's the easy part. It's really framing the public policy questions that you want to answer in a way that sheds some light on that. There's a little bit of research to do on emerging contaminants, and there's a little bit of research to do in terms of thinking about how to pay for it and how do you prevent the backsliding from wellhead protection, because you don't want to, I don't think, say to hell with it. You can do whatever you want, put a hazardous waste dump in there. We'll just treat it at the back end and not a problem. I don't think that's where we want to be. The lake stuff is harder. The lake stuff, there's a whole bunch of treatment approaches. I mean, the 208 program looked at 40 odd treatment technologies in the technologies matrix. And when you sorted it all out, 5 or 6 of them were any good, or were any good in context of what we're doing on Cape Cod. So going through that process and figuring out fact from fiction and what's hopeful and what's fanciful takes some effort. Thinking about how to characterize lakes, coming up with some reasonably cost-effective way to determine which lakes are driven more by external loads of phosphorus and which ones are driven more by internal recycling of phosphorus. And what does that mean in terms of what your management techniques? Those are all things that, are great ideas and necessary. I don't know if anybody's really figured them out. So I think there's some real new research and new thinking that needs to be done. So that one's a more challenging one, but they're both important.
Any additional questions based on the conversation we just had from the committee? Seeing none, I think we will move on. I see Ken Cirillo has joined us online. He has had his hand up for a bit. So Ken, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. My name is Ken Cirillo, and I am the director of the county's dredge program. And I've just been doing this for 2 years now, but the program has been running for 26 years. And they have worked on over 300 projects in just about every single town on the Cape except for Truro, which doesn't have any navigable channels or harbors. And we've dredged over 1.3 million cubic yards, so quite a bit of material. And I think what I just want to kind of highlight here is how we have impacted and hopefully helped the water quality challenges that we have on the Cape. So just trying to bring dredging along, and I know it's been used from time to time in these discussions. So, what do we do? What do we operate? The county has 2 dredges, one that was purchased in 2017 and one that was purchased in 2019. We recently sold the original dredge, the Codfish 1, after a very, very long year, 25 plus years of use. It really had required a little bit too much more maintenance and cost for us to keep that going. But we're in a rebuilding process now. I'd have to say, the lack of investment and over the years has sort of put us down, but now we're doing quite a bit and doing a lot of work. But, what are the projects that I think are very obvious? We work during the off season. We work from October through mid-June, when most everybody starts to go back on the inside. We're out there working all year long. We don't do any of the permitting. The towns do all the permitting. So we're really the county's DPW, if you will. We can't fix the causes of the problems that we have, but we certainly do a lot to do the maintenance and the mitigation of the effects. So with very little exception, 99% of the work that we do is put for beach nourishment. The sand is put back on the beach. Some of it, and I'll talk about that rather quickly, because I think it's an important segue here for some other work, is clearing the channels to their depth that they're supposed to have, which then by default, helps improve the navigation, whether it's recreational boating, commercial boating, commerce. And in many of these areas, we do have a lot of aquaculture taking place. So the obvious improvement of the flow of the water is really the biggest takeaway that I think we see from the dredging perspective. Last year we finished a 3-year project in Katuitt at Dead Neck, where we took away about 150,000 cubic yards. built up the island, but also, you know, did a tremendous amount to change the flow of that waterway. It was little by little, literally choking itself off. The opening was getting narrower and narrower, and we took back a large portion of the island to help that waterway move again. In fact, you know, now the town will hopefully start next year to go back and do a little bit more maintenance on it because it does need to be done, you know, every other year, every 2 years, 3 years, we'll see. Similar to Pompanesett, in the inside of Pompanesett, the old 1916 channel and the inner channel, those are done every couple of years, you know, improving the water quality there. And of course, the approach channel. You know, we look at all the Falmouth ponds, all the coastal ponds. Every year, we are doing half of those entrances. Very small projects, but very important projects because the waterway entrances there are very, very small. And as we have seen, if we don't do it and we skip a year, very, very quickly, we can see, you know, the effects taking place of the water flow slowing down and obviously the problems that happen upstream. So I think for the most part, you know, the important message here, the takeaway is that the dredging is the tool. The dredging is a very important part of our overall water quality on the Cape. And obviously, I think, as I mentioned, you know, we are in this sort of multi-year rebuilding program, which means, you know, we're trying very hard to build a reliable, dependable program because, as we've seen in the past, you know, if we all of a sudden have problems with equipment and we're not able to do the work, as mentioned, you know, very, very quickly, we do see how some of our areas, they can't and they do require to have dredging done on a very, very routine basis. And then just lastly, I'll talk about a project that we did in Pocasset River this year. The material was that very fine organics, otherwise known as muck. And the area there has really never been dredged. They think it was done back in the 50s. But the material could not be put on the beach, and the options were very, very limited on what to do. So we embarked on a very unique a program for the county where we use these geotextile bags, very, very heavy bag material, a textile bag as it's called. And we had a small dredge and we dredged 2 or 3 areas in the harbor and we pumped the material, the muck, into these very big bags in the parking lot. And the water came out clear. There was no smell. After the project was done, it was about 4 or 5 weeks in January. The material was left to dry out in the bags. And at the end of March, so about 6 to 8 weeks later, that material was taken by the town of Bourne and brought to their landfill. It was almost like a brick, but it could be used, and they did use it. There were no contaminants in this material, so that's important to point out. We weren't taking material that had some problems that could not be used. But the project was a success, and I think that's the key takeaway here, is that it does have implications for many other parts of the Cape where we do have these up embayments where the material is, nobody wants to touch it, nobody knows what to do with it, and for the lakes and ponds as well. You know, it's not an experiment, it's a proven technique, it's a proven kind of dredging that's been used, and we were very, very happy with the results because it did show that A, we could do it, B, it does remove a fair amount of material. You know, unfortunately, in the Pocasset River, we could have dredged there. We could still be dredging and we would still be taking out that muck. There was just so much muck in that river on top of the debris that caused a lot of challenges. But it can be done, and it is, I think, a very important part of the process here of remediation that we need to look at. And I think the good part is that we have now the capability and the experience to add that to our portfolio. So I think that's it. I think the important takeaway here is that dredging is a key part of water quality, and the county program that we have been running now for 26 years will be starting our 27th year. And again, I've only been doing it for 2 years, so I can't take a whole lot of credit for any of the success. But nonetheless, you know, I think we're the silent service on the Cape that most people don't know exists, and the benefit that we offer, I think, is pretty significant. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Dredge has been an invaluable resource to the region for a very long time. I see Brian has his hand up. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit to the discussion because I think Andrew brought up a few really good points about, you know, funding projects or, you know, planning and frameworks. You know, I think one of the key things to remember, though, is the projects versus frameworks discussion, though, is that and maybe I'm just getting a different sense of what he means by projects, but you can't plan for a problem you don't understand. If we don't have good data, if we don't have a good understanding of how the ponds actually work, we can't plan to do anything with them. Which is why I would say, take a look at our county laboratory. I mean, it's a very unique facility. There aren't a whole lot of these types of facilities in the United States. It's a key asset in our fight for good water quality on Cape Cod, and it's a very valuable place to invest additional funding so that we can do those analyses to figure out what we need to do with the ponds or any of our other water. We should be on top of monitoring PFAS. I mean, that should be like one of the key things. There should be no debate over whether we should invest in PFAS analysis capability at our lab. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. That's just as important, I would say, as any of the other efforts that have been advanced thus far. There's some work that USGS has been doing in the area of our ponds that is simple and cheap and gives us a whole heck of a lot of information about where the water is actually coming into the ponds. So before we can plan to put any kind of infrastructure, be that sewer or on-site wastewater in the area of a pond, you need to understand where's the most impact of where to put that infrastructure. So you're not wasting the funding. If you sewer around a complete pond, you're probably not solving the problem. But USGS has some techniques that can identify where the sources of water are coming into the pond and where it's going out of the pond, so you can target those infrastructure investments. And I just think it's really important, again, that we don't totally write off projects, because I think there are projects that are valuable research-based projects, maybe not infrastructure-based projects, funding installation of sewering in Barnstable or Mashpee. But I think it's important that we fully understand what we're getting ourselves into. I think the Ponds Initiative is fantastic. I think it's a good initiative, and I want to make sure that the monitoring that is done as part of that project isn't just doing things like cell counts of bacteria or cyanobacteria in the pond. I mean, one of the things we should be doing with that is bolstering our laboratory so that we can test for phosphorus as a component. But if phosphorus is the problem, we should have a full understanding of what the phosphorus loading is in the pond, and giving our laboratory the capability to do that at a lower cost. So that's my addition to that discussion. Is this can't just be planning and frameworks. There have to be some projects to give us the data to deal with those things. And I think the county has a lot of assets and potential projects that can go a long way toward informing those framework building processes. Thank you.
Well said, Brian. Thank you. I see Sean O'Brien has joined us. Hands up. Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee for all that you're doing. We really appreciate the time you're putting into this. I want to kind of follow up on what Brian had just said. Many of us have been working on groundwater projects for many, many years here at the county, and we've done a lot of follow up over the years, whether it be contamination being discharged from municipal landfills when that seemed to be the issue many years ago, whether it's been problems at a military reservation, or even localized things like fuel tank leaks and fuel tank spills. We've always been involved in these things, and I got to tell you, the thing that concerns me so much with PFAS and the contamination with that is, I think what we're seeing right now, there just is not a lot of information out there, and I really think we have to make that effort to do more research into what we have and what's going on here within Barnstable County. If you look and you think about it, not just with public water supplies and thinking about private wells and some of the work that's being done by Silent Spring, we're starting to get an idea that yes, there is contamination out there. But I think when you also start to think about the fact that we have all of the sites that may have had firefighting foam used on them in the case of fires, whether it be something that may have occurred in Chatham years ago with a large laundry fire, or whether it be a small brush fire or a plane crash or whatever it might have been. A lot of times these things were used, and I think you really have to consider it the way this compound kind of stays in the environment. and it just does not go away. So I think it's really going to be critical for us. I think Brian brings up a good point, and the county commissioners have done a great job with allowing us the approval, as the assembly has within our capital budget this year, of purchasing another liquid chromatography dual mass spectrophotometer, this LCMS, to be able to test for PFAS and PFAS. But I think we also have to really start to look and to start doing that research out there and looking to see how expansive this impact may be. Not just, we're seeing it in public water supplies. We're seeing it in drinking water wells, with private wells. And I think you have to look at it in such a Cape-wide way. And you almost need to do the research of even going back and looking at what may have happened, where there may have been fires, where there may have been releases, etc. I mean, how many times have we heard of something around an airport, a crash truck on an airport, or something like that, or a rollover of a tanker truck that gets covered in foam somewhere on the outer Cape. And these are important things for us to start to review. I think also we have to look at these fluorinated compounds because they've also thrown a new wrench into everything too. We're no longer looking at parts per million and parts per billion when it comes to detection limits and instrumentation that goes along with this too. We're buying instrumentation that looks at parts per trillion now. We're looking at really low levels of contamination, that research is looking at to see what the health effects may be. So it's like, so we're starting to get into this new area with CECs, and it's just going to be so critical for us to, number one, have the equipment to do the detection. Number two, to be able to get the people or folks who have experience to do that investigation, to really see where these locations may have been. And I think that, as we go down the line, we're going to see a lot more of this. And it's going to be critical for us to be able to react. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, Sean. Thanks for those comments. Again, very well said. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of like to throw out a challenge or a concept for some of the presenters here today, because the connection that people have, both physically and economically and even emotionally, to an estuary or an abatement is different than it is to a freshwater pond.
Yes.
And I think one of the challenges I would put out there is that when we're talking about, most of the discussion today has been technical, but I think we ought to identify, as part of a proposal, a structure around each of these bodies of water that actually creates a friends of for that pond, engages the citizenry that has a huge interest in that pond, whether it's the physical side or the economic side, and really engage, because when you do that, you now have an entity to talk to in each of these bodies of water. And so what I sort of envision is a model for how to structure that geopolitical economic entity, along with the technical capacity to actually evaluate the pond. So for example, you go to pond A, you've identified, and the county can do this, who has a real interest in that, who is living on or around that pond. You create an entity, then you offer a technical opportunity to assess, evaluate, and possibly mitigate what's going on in that pond. Because it really, collecting the data is maybe 1/3 of actually understanding and then mitigating the plan. So I would love to see if a proposal comes to us that we could, help get our arms around, that it include that. We can not only do the water quality, but we can assess who has an interest in it, and maybe even help with a framework for a structure that would then engage the citizens who have an interest in the water.
Well said. Dan White. Dan, go ahead.
Hi, Dan White. I'm the laboratory director for the Barnstable County's Water Quality Laboratory under the Department of Health and Environment. I've been working in water for a long time, mostly on the research side up till taking this position a few years back. But I'd like to remind everyone to look at this more holistically, like Brian was talking about, where it's not just about drinking water or groundwater or surface water ponds. They're all linked. There's the idea that ponds and streams are an expression of the water table. And so you have that connection that goes both ways, and it all goes back into our soul aquifer for the Cape. So anything we can do that increases our ability to collaborate, increases our ability to bring research in. There's a lot of research and information out there on the Cape. We have great resources, WHOI, USGS, the county, the towns, all of our work. Any collaboration we can do is going to help everyone. That's all I wanted to add.
Great, thank you, Dan.
Mentioned I'm in your blind
Yeah,
spot.
you're already in a blind spot, so thank you.
Yeah, is now a good time to present?
Yes, please do.
Great. For those that don't know me, my name is Clay Chu, and I am the hazardous materials environmental specialist for Barnstable County, and also a team leader for the Groundwater Guardians, along with my colleague there, Brian. And I operate the water quality and hazardous waste program at Barnstable County that's been around since the late 1980s. My job is to intercept all of the contaminants that people are talking about today, with the exclusion of wastewater. I serve all the Cape, whether you are a resident, a visitor, small business. I work with firefighters to mitigate their waste. So when you're talking about their chemicals or golf courses, municipal or otherwise, I intercept the chemicals that people use in their day-to-day life or in their businesses or in their municipalities or their districts, whether it's a water district or a fire district. And, I love the idea of frameworks. I love theory. I'm boots on the ground. I'm out there collecting, whether it's the flares, that we were talking about the chloride contamination or the medications. I run these programs that just absolutely work to intercept these wastes. And I work for all 15 towns who support these programs for the last 30-something years, and as well as water districts and fire districts. And it's a topic that people really don't want to talk about, how much chemicals are out there, how much chemicals are in everybody's home. The EPA says that every household aggregates 25 pounds or more of household chemicals every year. That's stuff that they don't use to paint their home or to fuel their boat, stuff that they aggregate that they no longer want. Last year, we collected 625,000 pounds of those chemicals from businesses, firefighter departments, health departments, golf courses, etc. That's a lot of hazardous waste. 625,000 pounds of hazardous waste that didn't go down the septic system, that didn't get dumped in the backyard. These programs that I operate, that the county supports, support embayments, harbors, ponds, lakes, streams, marshes, wetlands, drinking water, everything. Chemicals have been found everywhere. You open up a clam, quahog, you might find it. Center for Coastal Studies did a study about shellfish and they found chemicals in there, pesticides and other things. And I think that it's a topic that people really aren't that interested in talking about, but the interception of these chemicals, and I think Andrew kind of alluded to it, what the EPA green chemists are calling franking chemicals. Once things go down the drain and are subject to hydrologic pressure, they recombine and make things that we just don't know what those things are and how they react and how to test for them. My programs intercept those before they even get into the ground. So last year, over 6,100 people used the program, the hazardous waste collection program. So that's a lot, right? So I met all of them. I work at all of them. But it's a really small percentage of the population that uses the program. If you look at the population statistic, year-round or seasonal population, 6,100 people it doesn't start to seem like a lot when you realize the capacity that's really out there, how much waste is really out there, all that legacy waste that's sitting around waiting for a severe flood or a structure fire to be released into our environment. And then there's just people that don't care and they get rid of it other ways. 5.85% of solid waste that comes off the Cape has hazardous waste. That's the contamination rate for solid waste according to the DEP. So you start looking at like the contamination rate of solid waste, it starts to get like a little bit disturbing, about how many chemicals are out there. And I'm always the Debbie Downer. Nobody ever wants to talk to me at the party because I'm like, oh, you know. But we have, you know, the county has been supporting these programs for a long time. We have a kiosk at every single police department, county funded through grant writing with myself and Mike McGuire to put a kiosk to collect the chemicals that people put into their bodies for medication, intercepting that waste, flares from boats, vehicles that put perchlorate into the environment. And then I don't know, we collect a cute little infographic. We collected 455 gallon drums of pesticide last year and over 272 55-gallon drums of gasoline. When you start to think of the 1 gallon of gasoline can contaminate 1 million gallons of drinking water, that starts to really add up. I also wonder about the cost of gasoline and how much gasoline people are bringing to me. But then there's also like even other chemicals that we don't also think about. This year alone in 2021, I've collected almost 62 pounds of elemental mercury. So when we're just past the halfway point for our fiscal year, that's a lot of mercury that's not making it into the drinking water. And I have to say that my team, we collected that piece by piece, ounce by ounce, pound by pound. People come to me with 26 pounds of mercury or a little thermostat, but that all adds up. We're only halfway through the year and over 60 pounds of mercury have been collected. We don't want to drink this stuff. We don't want to drink gasoline, pesticides, mercury. And I encourage the group to think about, like, how do we get the stuff out of the drinking water before it even makes it into the drinking water? Every single household has hazardous waste. EPA says it. I'm not going to argue with EPA. My program offers that, you know, so I think that it's really important to think about studying and analysis and data, which I have for the last over 30 years, but it's also important to offer the residents and businesses of Cape Cod a tangible, concrete opportunity to dispose of chemicals and intercept them before they make it to the drinking water. And I think it's also important to notice who supports these projects. The project that I submitted, supported by all 15 towns in writing, the Barnstable County Fire Chiefs Association. That was a job to get every single fire chief on Cape Cod to say that this is a project worth investing in. The Barnstable County Water Utilities Association supports the project that I proposed, and as well as, you know, folks at the national, state, and local level, and my colleagues at the county. Props to Brian, County Health, for supporting that. But I love theory, but I'm rooted in reality. People don't want to talk about this dirty little secret that we have on Cape Cod. People are in love with chemicals, and getting rid of them in a way that makes sense is a really great, tangible example of how we can make a difference that's positive, that impacts everybody, every single town, every single resident, every single municipal department, and every single small business that uses chemicals, which I've estimated to be about 4,300 on Cape Cod, small businesses, not like tier 2 reporters, which is like chemical, the electrical plant at the canal. So, you know, projects that are widely and broadly supported, that align to the ARPA principles and the county charter, supported by everybody on the Cape, that make a difference to everybody, I think are worth looking at. Even if it's not something that is like fun and exciting, like, you know, I don't know, you know, I'm not gonna throw anything out there, but, you know, it's the topic that people aren't fond of discussing, but it's what I do, and everyone has it except for maybe a couple really amazing people in the Cape. And yeah, so I just want to put it out there that, you know, even though it's not the probably the most exciting project out there, it's one that will make a difference to every single person on Cape Cod. So just putting it out there that that's on the table for you to make a difference on.
Great, thank you. I see Andrew has a comment.
Yeah, two things. I wanted to just respond to Dan's question about, you know, building the network of lake supporters. One of the things that's happening as part of the One Cape session is pond network. We, APCC, and the commission have already started on some of the work building that ponds network. We've had one meeting. This is the second one of that group, anticipating that the one form or another, the initiative might well get funded. That now is the time, given people's interest and proximity in the summer, that we should start getting those groups together. And so we agree with you, Dan, that that's a necessary thing, and that we've begun to do that work. So if people are interested in that, hopefully there's still room in that session at the end of the day at One Cape. We're looking to expand that network to get as many people who are interested as possible. The other thing I wanted to sort of throw out on the table is, we all know that, there's a bunch of different ways to govern, to manage money as it comes in. I think it's important, wherever you choose to recommend to spend this money, big thought pieces or individual projects, that you make whatever steps you need to make sure that the expenditures are incremental and additional to what it would otherwise be going. If the ARPA money is just used as a budgetary technique to take pressure off operating budgets and not be additive to what the baseline that the county's already doing, that's not really how this money ought to get spent. And it's not really how, it doesn't generate anything extra, both from a jobs purpose, which is the underlying basis for why we got this money in the first place, but also in terms of solving problems. There's language in the Cape Islands Trust that makes sure that the money that comes in there is incremental and additional, that it not be replacing existing sources of municipal revenue or state revenue in terms of assistance provided. Because to not have that in there means you're not moving the needle forward. And I think everybody involved in this knows that we need to do more, not less, in all the areas that we've talked about. So whatever language you can put in to make sure that it's just not a budgetary shell game would be an important thing to make sure it happens.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there any other input?
Yeah, just 3 quick questions.
Not about bees, right?
No. What did you do with 625,000 pounds?
Do you want
That's number 1. Number 2 is, what's your budget? The number 3 is, how do you sleep at night? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually an excellent sleeper. And I have a sassy answer I give to the people who I see. I'm like, oh, I threw out the swamp out back, because that's what people say they did with this waste back in the day. People tell me all the time the horrible things that they do, and I'm like, good thing I'm not regulatory. What do we do with it? So the state has a hierarchy for disposal that the county follows. And I'm part of the state strategic sourcing team for hazardous waste, so we talk about that. At the top is recycling. So some of this waste gets recycled or reblended. It's used as a fuel for to make electricity or to fuel, let's say, concrete factories, that kind of thing. So there's a whole hierarchy. And the last sort of level in the pyramid is landfilling in a state that accepts that. And one of my passions is environmental justice. And so that's something that we really put a lot of scrutiny on in the process, the bid process at the county. I put together a team to look at the bid for hazardous waste. And and that includes people from different towns, like the town of Barnstable and other big stakeholders. And we look at, where does this waste go? Where is it eventually going to end up? So that's something that we definitely take a look at. 625,000 pounds is not a ton. We do 24 hazardous waste collections in the spring, summer, and fall, and I never shut down unless there's an electrical storm. So if there's almost a hurricane or something, I'm still there. So I would like to have something a little bit more seasonal, more year-round, open more frequently to get more of the citizens. A lot of people work on Saturdays. So there's a lot more waste out there that could be intercepted. A lot more waste. And I think about it like also like I recently sold my home, not to Brian, couldn't afford it. And it's something I never looked at when I bought my home as a single mom back in the day, that you're prohibited from leaving your household chemicals behind when you leave that property. And I think it's really important to notice, like, our economy on the Cape really rests on clean water, but like, how do we tangibly support it in a way that maps onto the county principles, what the towns really want. And I know that's the long answer to your question.
Then your budget, that's a great,
So,
great answer.
Yeah, the budget, so this year the prices went up 82% to the towns and to the water districts that support these programs. Supply chains, cost of equipment, immigration, everything has really put a tight squeeze on the hazardous waste industry. 82% was a lot for the towns to swallow. So the internal budget for the county is my salary, and I hire a couple contractors to help me out. They're usually senior citizens who are in like the environmental corps. But the burden of the budget falls to the municipalities. And the project that I presented would ameliorate a lot of those by having different cost controls in place that would really make a difference, a tangible difference to the towns. And in the budget that I submitted, the 5-year operating budget, in part of my request, I scrutinized that deeply because, you know, I'm right there with the guys in the trenches talking about the budgets. Like, are we going to pay for this or are we going to do something else? And they know that if someone has sodium cyanide or something else that's like horrible and scary and they don't have a way to get rid of it, they're going to throw it in the trash. They're going to throw it on, like down their toilet. And so the towns really put a strong commitment behind this, as does the Dennis Water District, who was one of the supporters of the program. So the county has like a reasonable budget to support the program, and we're not asking for any kind of increase there. What we're really asking for is increased capacity to meet the needs of the residents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just as a little addendum to that, that burden of the budget increase would be covered by the cost of the towns, who will be seeing an increased budget every year. And that's part of the price escalator that I put into the 5-year operating plan.
Great. Any additional questions from the committee or additional input from the public of the county? Seeing none, I think we will conclude today. We're almost at an hour and a half. And just to sort of set the context, what we did today and what we're going to do moving forward, I think what was presented is the way that I heard is Barnstable County government is a unique thing in the state, and it has incredible value to the region, a lot of which has been demonstrated on the water quality issue, being, you know, a peninsula with 400 miles of coastline. Christie Santori from Cape Cod Commission presented to us the overview on water quality a couple of weeks ago. And it really does break down into sort of the saltwater, freshwater, drinking water. I think we've seen as those as 208 has emerged, that there's a confluence and ways to sort of that public and private infrastructure can be used to address both of those. But there's coordination that's necessary at the appropriate level, and I think regionally is probably the appropriate level for water quality. So you have a unique entity in the Cape Cod Commission and Barnstable County government. We have a 208 plan on the saltwater side. We forwarded to the commission the recommendation that they fund the freshwater program. There has been a suggestion today that maybe a drinking water plan is also necessary. So if those 3 plans were developed at the county level, and then the operational structures that already exist at the county level were organized around that, that could be an incredibly unique and effective water quality program. So they have plans, the ability to complete that planning. They have financing structures that are incredibly important and make infrastructure less expensive for the towns in the Water Pollution Trust Fund and the septic loan program. And then they've got operational programs that are very unique and valuable. The Technology Center, the lab, the dredge, the hazardous waste program, the coastal insurance program, all of that. That really sort of defines the important, the Barnstable County regional government and the importance of it to all of us as individual citizens, and how much it really sort of supports the efforts and the work of the towns also. So this is, I think, is a really unique opportunity. I've also heard discussed whether we should invest in sort of the planning side or the operational side. At least I think the good news is there's enough money to do both, right? So I think we should think along those lines. So in closing, I would say anyone that's offered any sort of input for the community, they should take the opportunity to put that in writing so that we can have it on hand and available for the committee's review. And I would encourage the county department heads and employees through their county administrator to forward any suggestions that you might have on how this, things may evolve. So I want to thank everyone for their participation, the committee, of course, and the county department heads and employees, present and past. Thank you all for your contributions today. I think this was great. In 2 weeks, we're going to meet again to sort of fine tune some of what we've been hearing on the housing side and on the water quality side, with the hope that we can wrap up a final report in September for the commissioners. So more to come on that.
That's Brian, a quick question. Brian, were you on Mindy Todd a couple weeks ago? Is that you I was hearing?
Yeah.
So the reason good job, if anybody wants to go back and listen to that,
It's so good.
you did a great job on that,
Thank you.
and it's really good background in a little bit more depth.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Something at the show you were on too?
No, well, Brian was on a subsequent one because everyone loves to talk about septic systems.
Yeah,
Nobody wants to talk about chemicals. But Brian and I did a one, a couple, what was it, like 2 months ago, Brian? That was fun. That was the
Yeah.
first radio interview we've done.
I think her stuff is cataloged. I mean, I think you can go
Yeah,
in and listen to past shows, so I think it's a.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll put a reference to that on the website.
Yeah, that was good, that was good.
Well, I think everyone wants to talk about septic.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah.
They do.
Because you've laid the groundwork,
It is,
George.
it is.
You've made it okay to say poops.
George, or did you already get?
I did, I just employed, just part-time at the test
Oh,
center.
no, when I first met you. As that. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's good enough.
Yeah.
Comments by August 5th.
Written comments by August 5th would be great. Thank you, Vera, for putting a deadline on that. At this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Then.
Okay, we'll have to take a roll call vote on that. Lisa and Kristen are not with us. Dorothy Soweries,
Aye.
Wendy Northcross. Yes, Dan Wolf. Aye. Karen Gardner. Sean Gonzalez. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was great.
Thanks, George.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and it's on the, I.
Yeah.